we'll talk more about that. I want Jaeson to come up here. He's gonna trace for you the transformation of the cartels from the drug organizations of the 1970s when you were, just smoking a bit of dope at a party or whatever, to the ultra-violent, extremely powerful transnational criminal organizations that they are today. Jaeson, come on up.
My name is Jaeson Jones, and I am really honored to be here with you this morning because what this nation is facing is much bigger than an immigration issue. What we are absolutely witnessing is the largest U.S. intelligence failure since 9/11. And I want to stress that one more time because I'm about to show it to you. What we are really witnessing in this country that has happened in Mexico and at our southwest border is the largest U.S. intelligence failure since 9/11. And I know that as soon as I said that, many in this room said, now hang on a second, this is actually by design. And that's absolutely reasonable because that's what you are shown mostly, day in, day out, by most of the news media across this country. And it's absolutely true. We have a major problem at our border with immigration. But what I'm going to show you today is that that is one layer of the problem impacting all of you and your families. And today is about you and your families. I want to be very clear on this because what you see there and what I'm going to show you today absolutely impacts every part of this nation today. And you feel it and you see it across this country differently. In the northern parts of the nation, we feel it mostly in the realm of overdose deaths. Last year, 107,622, which we should really call fentanyl poisonings. But that's how it's cataloged by the CDC. In the South, we feel it differently through human smuggling and human trafficking. But behind that are groups that are directly responsible and are in control of it all. And I'm going to walk you through their evolution and what they have become in Mexico and what they are doing globally today. And as I'm doing this, I would ask that you say to yourself, my God, why have we not been told by our government? That is their job. And if you have seen this, what we're going to show you today, ask yourself, why are they not telling you day in, day out? Never mind left or right. What about the Homeland Security enterprise that Lara talked about in great detail, whose role and whose job it is to remain independent, but ensure the national security of this nation and of our fellow citizens? Before I do that, though, I'm going to walk you through this. Usually I start with a great story about a young child that we rescued, and it grabs you, it hits you in the heart. Today, I want to show you the level of violence that has been hitting us for a much longer period of time that you have not been shown. In May of 2012, I'm a captain in the Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division of the Texas Department of Public Safety, in charge of one of the largest fusion centers in the country. There's a captain there. And one of my agents comes to me and he says, Captain, we got a problem. So what is it? He said, one of the sources that we have within the Las Zetas cartel has come to me and he says that in Piedras Negras there's a stash house where they're holding 40 men, women, and children from countries all over the world. Here's the problem. They're going to take them out tonight in groups of 10 to 15 at a time to a kill house. They're going to cut them into pieces. They're going to throw their bodies in the streets. Now, the reason that was important is because at the time, for the few days before he came to me, we had been having this, and many of you may remember this, as bodies were being hung in Nuevo Laredo. Ladies and gentlemen, not on the other side of the planet, in Nuevo Laredo at our southern border, right near our border. This was happening day after day in May. And so when he came to me, immediately, my job is pretty simple. How can I make this happen to help make them successful by leveraging the intelligence community, our partners who we had already established to try to save these people's lives? And I watched for 8 hours as local, state, federal components came together to do everything they could to save these people's life. And I want you to think of, this is a state law enforcement organization now literally involved in a mass rescue before these people are killed. Unfortunately, it wouldn't come to fruition. The source would call a few hours later and say that they had been moving groups of 10 at a time and they had already killed them. The problem is we didn't know how many had been lost. And I will never forget for the rest of my days the look on so many young analysts who had worked tirelessly. agents, hardened agents who had been in the job over 25 years, absolutely destroyed, that they knew that these people were dead. So I went home that night and I thought, how do I rebuild my team? How do I put these people back together as a captain? Next morning I wake up, and as I'm getting dressed, I get another call. Cap, they're going to do it again tonight. Do we have approval to start the process? Absolutely, get on it. Whatever you need, let me know. As the day went on, what we learned is this was the location of the house just on the other side of Piedras Negras. The Los Zetas were involved, and they absolutely were going to kill another group. What I'm going to show you here, this is a video from a Texas National Guard helicopter of the rescue operation. I'm going to leave it muted here. I just want to let it play as I talk to you and tell you this story, because it's an important point to the level of violence that has been taking place in Mexico, directly impacting us. Behind this residence, you'll see a rail line, and you'll see a lot of people at some point there. Those are many of the victims who they were going to kill that night. This is a stash house. What we didn't know at the time is that this stash house was really just moving migrants into the United States. That's all they were. But what the Zetas were doing were killing innocent men, women, and children, making it look like they were the rival cartel members, and then hanging them from bridges. And so as a result of great collaboration and a team of teams approach between local, state, federal law enforcement, and most elite units in Mexico known as SAMAR, they conducted an operation as a direct result of this. But they said, we need one shred of proof before we will go, because we have too many operations we're running back to back. We can't pull forces. We have to know that there's a sign of life there. Wouldn't you know it, the one day they need a sign of life, every helicopter we have is down. Usually, ladies and gentlemen, on the southern border, I could pick a color of a helicopter. This day, they're all down for annuals. And a captain in the Texas Rangers Border Security Operations Center by the name of Aaron Grigsby calls me and he says, buddy, he says, I think I got one. I got a young National Guard unit in South Texas that are willing to fly, but they got a bad camera on the bottom. They got to change it out. And literally, these two young pilots are underneath this machine with a crescent wrench, trying to take off this lens to put one long enough to magnify, so that when we flew the border, they could see far enough into Mexico to conduct this rescue. And you are seeing that video play out. At one time, this was the most sensitive investigation in the state of Texas. This had to get approval from the governor, which was Perry at the time. This operation resulted in the rescue of 52 men, women, and children from China, Honduras, Guatemala. This is how long what has been happening down there in Mexico has played out, ladies and gentlemen. The next day we were briefed. It was a great rescue. Most of these people had no idea that they were about to be killed. They were just migrating from one stash house to the next stash house to the next stash house before they made it into the United States. And I share that with you because what you're seeing now, we learned the day after. These are the dead that we could not save. So if you think for a second that what has been happening down there has not had a massive impact on me, it's exactly why we keep going. It's exactly why we keep doing what we are doing. And you can see at 43 dead in one incident alone. Heads chopped off, arms chopped off because we couldn't save them. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been playing out for some time, and today I'm going to walk you through the evolution of these cartels, who are not a U.S.-Mexico problem. We have to change our way of thinking. They are a global problem, and I'm going to show them to you today, right now, their evolution. In 2006, these cartels were truly organized crime. And this is when the Calderon administration began using their military to come in and go after them. And if you remember at the time, everyone said this is the exact wrong thing to do. This is bad policy. You don't use your military, because we were looking at it through the lens of us in the United States. But in Mexico, what was taking place was unprecedented. They were losing their country to these cartels at unbelievable levels, not only through the use of military-grade weapons, but through corruption at the highest levels of the Mexican government. And so when the Calderon administration began using their military, we were witnessing on your southern border gun battles raging anywhere from 2 to 6 to 8 hours at a time, as these cartels truly were fighting back. This is when the insurgency started. And then from there, terrorism in 2010 and the parallel government. But we also saw some other things. And the whole time this is happening, by the way, I'm screaming internally in the organization. I'm saying we've got problems. We've got to think bigger. And they're saying to me, Jason, we hear you. But as long as that shit stays in Mexico, that's not our problem. I traveled to Washington. I'm briefing people at the Reagan building, head of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, U.S. intelligence agencies, and they say, Jason, we hear you. We see the reporting in classified and unclassified, but we don't see it in the data. And they weren't lying. But things were getting worse, continuing to degrade. And you see it here in how Mexican citizens have been impacted. Ladies and gentlemen, you have to remember, we're talking 2010 to 2012 originally. Look at the numbers killed under the Calderon administration, 63,000. Under the Nieto administration, it climbed as they continued to battle the cartels. But then under the AMLO administration, where we are today, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, his policy is hugs, not bullets. And look at the deaths of citizens. People like to argue with me all the time about what strategies really work. I can tell you what doesn't work, and that is doing nothing to stop these cartels. And you can see it in the data. When you look here and you see the missing in Mexico, it's a very important number. And the reason for that is because cartels will tell you that you can't count a body that doesn't exist. And that's exactly why they guiso them, which means you kill them, you cut them off at the head, the arms, the legs, every joint, and then you burn them in barrels. You hear a lot about acid. The truth is, acid's not readily available in Mexico. It's not readily available in the United States. So they mostly cook them in barrels using diesel. Right now, we're looking at 310,000 deaths in Mexico. And I can tell you, anybody that gives you data, you need to know in Mexico, the way they collect it, it's off. But this is the best we can get using their own information. So what happened? What really took place here? Well, in 2007, this is also where we began to see something else. And that was this seizure of $213 million in currency. Does anyone remember this, by the way? This was a major tripwire because this was China's involvement in chemical precursors. But this wasn't for fentanyl. This was for methamphetamine, as they were first importing P2P, one of the most damaging methods on a human body in the creation of methamphetamine, which is why we're seeing a lot of people in the position that we are today in the United States who are addicted. But these were the individuals responsible, the Los Zetas cartel, absolutely hyper-violent. And what they brought was an unprecedented level of tradecraft to the organizations. You know, in the old days when you talked to the cartels and you were buying dope from these drug traffickers, that's exactly what they were. They were drug traffickers. And when we would approach them to go do a deal at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they wouldn't get the dope deal done until 9 or 10 at night. That's how it really works on doper time, as we used to call it, in the narcotic service. When the Zetas came, they brought discipline. And when you listen to Ocio Cardenas, the head of the Gulf Cartel, that's exactly what he would say. Not only did they bring discipline, they brought loyalty. And they were all former special forces of the GAFE, which is basically the Green Berets of Mexico. These individuals here, this is Miguel Trevino, an absolute sadist, had no problem killing people at will just to show his level of power in Mexico. Lascano, this was originally one of the heads of the Los Zetas. He was killed in a gun battle with one of the most elite units in Mexico known as Samar. This is Omar Trevino, but these four, really these five, they are the people who created the monster that we see unfold in the last decade in Mexico. And when I say monster, this is what I'm talking about. This was where we went from an insurgency, where I talked to you about how they were battling the government of Mexico, truly fighting back with everything from 50 caliber belt-fed machine guns, light anti-tank weapons, RPGs, 40 millimeter grenades on your border. This has been happening for a very long time. But then this kicked off, and I will never forget it, in 2010. The mass murder of 72 men and women who who, by the way, once again, were just migrants passing through San Fernando, just south of Matamoros, when the Los Zetas came into the Gulf Cartel's territory and executed them. Why? So that the government of Mexico would use their forces against their rivals. So when you see these mass murders in Mexico, that's very often what some of the causes of these things are, and the propaganda that then follows. But it didn't stop here. Just a few months later, we would have this unspeakable act of violence against innocent men, women, children, as an SIU unit, which is a DEA unit, had a leak. And Omar Trevino, one of the individuals I just showed you, believed that there were snitches in this town, and so they killed everyone. Men, women, children, they were executed, they were cut into pieces, and they were guisoed so that their bodies couldn't be counted. To this day, they have only been able through DNA to identify about 60 folks. How many have heard of this? A few of you. Monterey Casino fire. Again, the Los Zetas, another mass killing of citizens in Mexico. Why? Because they didn't pay the piso or the tax to the cartels. This is the violence and the direction into terrorism as they went. 53 people killed in this fire. Horrible thing here. Most of them were not shot and killed. They set the casino on fire. They ran to the bathrooms in the back, and they were trapped. The windows had been boarded up. And they died of smoke inhalation, most of them. And then we had this escalation into tradecraft, something that we were worried that was coming, but to what degree and how would it hit? We could see it in the escalating tripwires day in, day out of what was taking place. I want to set this up. I may have a little problem. You may have to activate this for me. But what you are seeing right here is an individual who was killed, private citizen. He was dressed in a police officer's uniform in Juarez, Mexico. He was then laid on the ground, and they dialed their version of 911. And as first responders came, this is what took place. They filmed it just as they had seen what was happening overseas at the time. What was it? We were in the world of Middle East terrorism, and they were watching as Middle East terrorist organizations were filming the folks that they were killing, beheading, and now the cartels, for the first time, not only were using a Tovex bomb, which is a readily available mining explosive in Mexico. It doesn't have high yield, but now we had a car bomb cook-off, but they videoed it, all a part of their propaganda machine to instill fear. Now remember, ladies and gentlemen, this didn't happen in the southern part of Mexico. This happened in Juarez, just south of El Paso, as the Juarez cartel and the Sinaloa cartel were battling for control. I know many of you remember those battles that were taking place. And then 2012, this happened. We had a source on the ground very quickly afterward. The target here was the mayor of Nuevo Laredo. He was sitting in his office doing work when this bomb cooked off. And if you want to see the luckiest cat in Mexico on June 29th, 2012, watch this guy right here. And this is your car bomb here. The blast was much more focused, directly targeting the mayor. Now, you will hear from a lot of people that the cartels are not terrorist organizations because they're not trying to take over or instill their political will. That is absolutely false. Absolutely false, and has been for a very long period of time. We had people on the ground very rapidly. You can see right here, here's his office. He had just gotten up, walked to the back of the building when the bomb went off. He survived it. He was using the restroom just by sheer chance. They would get him, though. A few years later, he would be found in the trunk of his vehicle with no arms, no legs, and no head. But yet you are told that there is no political will by the cartels to take over that country. This has been happening for a very long time. The thing about this that was a major significant tripwire was the tradecraft, and how what they were leveraging, their tradecraft was getting better day after day. And why? Because when you sit down and you talk to these cartel operatives, what they will tell you is that they are at war. It doesn't matter what we think. What do they think? What is in their mind? Because the other side gets a say. And they believe themselves to be at war. They will tell you that. Lara and I actually debriefed a Halcon, a lookout, a Falcon, when we first met in Roma, Texas. And she actually got to ask him, you know, what's going on down there? And what did he say? We are at war. 4 generations of armored vehicles, ladies and gentlemen. When we first started seeing some of these vehicles, they were what they call the monsters, like right here, what you see. And I used to think to myself, my God, how do you stop these damn things? And I'll never forget it. We brought in one of our sources who was a Zeta. He said, oh, it's no problem. He said, all you do, see right here in the sides here, where the door jambs are, he says, all you do is you just run up to the vehicle and you just open up. And eventually those rounds will skip through and make it in and hit the driver. Because what they learned is that these things were big, they were heavy, and they were slow. And that was their way of defeating them. But if you look at them today, what do you notice? And they will tell you that mobility is life because they are fighting for their lives against rival cartels and the government of Mexico. And this is where the lighter vehicles came from. First, we started seeing these armored boxes on the back. Then we started seeing the 3rd generation, which were very good, by the way. They were very difficult to tell, except that you could see that they were armored through the glass. But they got very good at their tradecraft here. When we talk about how did they control a plaza or a municipality, you will hear from experts that the cartels are a gang. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to be very clear here. The cartels are not a gang. A gang says they control a certain roadway or a group of neighborhoods in the United States. These cartels truly have control of local, state, federal law enforcement who report to the plaza boss. And I have been on a Title III. A Title III is an investigation where you're listening to them talk. When a general calls in to the plaza boss and says, I'm going to be your new general, when do you want to meet to discuss payment? This is how it really works and has been working for a very long time in Mexico. I want to show you what a QRF team is, a quick response force. How is it that they maintain control in these municipalities? When you're seeing these QRF teams, what I want you to realize is they check on and off just like law enforcement. They never shut down. It's 365 days a year. What you're seeing is a 3rd generation armored vehicle driving through Nuevo Laredo, being filmed at Passing Motors. This is known as the Troops of Hell. They are the armed wing of Cartel del Noreste in Nuevo Laredo today. Notice the 50 caliber and the slide-in armor packages, but also how light the vehicle is compared to where they started. And the reason for that is because they learned mobility is life. And this is what they look like inside. And I'm traveling the country and I'm saying, we've got problems at the southwest border. We need help. And what do they say to me? But Jason, we hear you. As long as it stays in Mexico, they keep telling me. Back to back, all over this country. This is Cartel del Noreste. I'm not going to show you this entire video in its entirety. This is the Troops of Hell who I've been showing you. And this is them who have just taken Cartel Jalisco New Generation members in custody, and they've been torturing them for days. If you've watched any of these videos, what you notice is that usually as they're cutting their heads off, they're not fighting. What you're not told is because for days they have been tortured, and they have had mock killings up until the very end. But I want you to look at the weaponry. This looks like a military operation. In this video here, they fillet these two individuals. First one by cutting his head off with a fillet knife, and the other two have their heads bashed in with sledgehammers. It is absolutely gruesome. And I share this with you because this is not happening on the other side of the planet. This is happening at your border. The people who are committing these crimes, many of them live in the United States, in Laredo, cross into Mexico to commit these crimes, come back. Because remember, the cartels have money. They can afford a visa. And I can tell you that many of them are here and walk among us. This is Cartel del Noreste in 2020, and Sedena, which is the big army of Mexico, battling them in Nuevo Laredo. And this is why it's important, because this cartel is here in this city. This is the reason I'm showing you this one. CDN, which used to be the Los Zetas, operate and have a large span of control of the drugs coming in and out of this city. But I want to show you the level of engagement happening in Mexico day in, day out by the Mexican military against these cartel operatives. Sedena killed 17 of these sicarios in this one engagement. This happened less than 1 mile from the border in Laredo. And in addition to that, the gunfire could be heard in Laredo, which happens all the time. It's nothing new. And I'm going to show you some of those things that Lara and I have both been involved in here shortly. But when we talk about the evolution into the final phase of where we see these cartels today, it is a true parallel government. And this was the first incident that really put it into perspective that Mexico had lost its territory and its ability to truly crush these cartels, because Operation Jalisco really illuminated to what degree in the Sierra Mountains they have full control, because they launched an operation against El Mencho, a very young cartel, Cartel Jalisco New Generation at the time, who had only been in play about 2 years. But how did they make their money very rapidly, very quickly? Is that they started moving cocaine and methamphetamine globally all over the world. And in this operation, they shot down one of their elite unit's helicopters. And it stopped the whole operation. They even stopped their ground forces. And it was really stunning, because when this took place, we were stunned. You have to remember, Jalisco is the wine country of Mexico. And the level of violence taking place was incredible here. I mean, you had 19 arrested, 4 clashed, 25 municipalities involved in that state in this incident. This really was a major tripwire. And you heard from the intelligence agencies, this is the most violent cartel in Mexico because of this one incident. And I just laughed. They were so far behind as to what was really taking place. This had been all a part of us screaming, there are problems. And what did they say? The same thing they always say to me. Jason, as long as that stays in Mexico, they keep telling me. As long as it stays in Mexico. Only things were rapidly spinning out of control. And the trade craft of these cartels were getting better and better. This was one of the vehicles that used an RPG and a light anti-tank weapon to bring down that helicopter. By 2018, things had definitely begun to shift, and we first saw the elite group. This is the Special Forces elite units of Cartel Jalisco New Generation. They are trained by Special Forces in Mexico from the United States, who have left and now are looking to make money, who go down there to conduct this kind of training. I want you to look at what you're seeing here. It is an army. And yet most of Americans have no idea to what degree this has been taking place in Mexico, as that country has been slowly and slowly been taken over by these cartels. You would have thought that at some point after that occurred, that somebody would have said something, done different operations in Mexico. Instead, the exact opposite has happened. After the Jalisco operation failed, and it was considered a massive failure for Mexico, El Mencho, the head of that cartel, notified President Nieto that if you do that again, I'll come into Mexico City. You see, what's happening now in that country is that Mexico is their hub. You can have the northern border, you can do what you want, but you leave the Mexico City alone. But now what has happened is that this thing has flipped. They have become so powerful now that along the frontera, the cartels, and in many areas away from Mexico City, the cartels truly control that part of the government. Received this video, broke this worldwide. This thing got millions of views. This is the elite group in 2020. And I want you to look at their armament and their armored vehicles. This, again, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a military. These are non-state actors with this level of capability. And I ask you, what terrorist organizations around the world have this kind of capability where you've seen this? The answer is you haven't. But again, as I'm traveling, I'm sending this up to federal law enforcement. I'm saying we've got problems, and they're saying to me the same thing. Jason, as long as it stays in Mexico, as long as it stays down there, it's not our problem. And yet things were getting worse and worse and worse. I want you to look at the fire teams that they've got here. I know there's a lot of former military personnel here. But yet they kept telling me I'm wrong. It's not going to impact the United States. Remember, you get the threats you get. You don't get the threats you want. And in 2016, this was the first surface-to-air missile to be seized in Mexico. Ladies and gentlemen, look at the location of it. Just south of Juarez, Mexico. This was my last act as a captain before retiring. I requested that this be unclassified so that all of air traffic control and the FAA could get a copy of this, because I needed them to know, because when you take off out of El Paso, I don't know if you noticed, you make a big bank over Juarez coming back. My fear was you get one of these guys high on dope who fires one of these things off and brings down an airliner. This was the Juarez cartel, also known as La Línea, the enforcement wing of the Juarez. The reason this was significant, though, was because at the time they were a degraded cartel. And what that immediately told us is if this cartel had this capability, that those further down closer to deeper Mexico who were much larger in scale, they definitely had them. This was, again, a major tripwire missed by the U.S. agencies. But what did they tell me? But Jason, as long as it stays in Mexico, that's what they keep telling me. And they also would say it's not terrorism, Jason, because they're not trying to overthrow the government. They're not trying to change things. Are you aware of this? This is from CNN. Look at the numbers here. This is their reporting. You can Google this. In the last election, the number of politicians in Mexico killed and staffers is incredible. How many of you heard anything about this on national news? Exactly. You see, it doesn't look good to talk bad about your number one trading partner. But Jason, as long as it stays in Mexico, they told me. And I'm screaming, we've got problems. This is a seizure by U.S. Customs and Border Protection in Starr County, Texas in 2011 of a light anti-tank weapon. What was happening is as we would engage the Los Zetas on the Mexico side, they would flee to the U.S. That's right, believe it or not, your border's not been secure for some time. And what they do is what we call leapfrogging. When they're being engaged, their goal is to go to the United States, jump into the river, go to the U.S. side, and then leapfrog across the U.S. side, then go back into Mexico. But many times they would still be engaged. So they started bearing military-grade weapons on our side of the river, so that way once they crossed, they had first, second, and third exit points, and they knew exactly where to go in order to be able to get these kind of weapons. And yes, you're looking at a light anti-tank weapon right there on U.S. soil. Along with 40 millimeter grenade launchers. Back then they used a lot of the 37 millimeters and they would hone them out to 40 millimeter. But Jason, as long as it stays in Mexico, they would tell me. 2013, I'm a captain in the Texas Rangers Border Security Operations Center now, and I get a call. Hey, we got something weird happening, Cap. Yeah, well, we got a murder in South Lake, Texas, but here's what's odd. FBI, DEA, and HSI are all on scene. That's what we call a clue. I said, get up there. And sure enough, what did we find? We found that a Gulf Cartel lawyer had been assassinated with such precision. This was such a major tripwire to our country, and no one told you the background. The background was that El Gato from the Beltran Leyva organization had spent almost $1 million to find this lawyer who had been in hiding. And what they did is they put some of the most advanced GPS tracking devices on family vehicles out of other states and then monitored them for months until they finally located him. And once they located him, they then used the tracking devices to follow him to the South Lake Mall where he and his wife were going to shop. And as they followed him in, as soon as they parked, they blocked the vehicle. A gunman exited from the rear of the vehicle, ran up, shot him multiple times, made sure he was dead, jumped back in and fled. But Jaeson, as long as it stays in Mexico, they told me. Then I'm sitting in the office again one morning, having coffee, get a call from the Texas Rangers in Brownsville, Texas. Hey, we got a problem. What is it, guys? We got a body with no head. And it's floating in the intercoastal, and it's been gutted, and the entrails have been yanked out. Well, that's a clue that something's gone horribly wrong. Can we use the team to find out? It's a team that I can't talk about publicly because they are still doing amazing things to protect this nation and this great state. Absolutely. Within about 5 hours, we'd identified that the head was in Mexico, that the shooter was a Border Patrol agent along with his crew, and that they were working directly for the Gulf Cartel. And what had happened is that this individual in the bottom right here had been stealing loads of cocaine out of tires as they were putting them in there. So the hit was given, and this Border Patrol agent, Joe Luna, was responsible along with his brother and his crew. Come to find out, ladies and gentlemen, he was in the country illegally. He had gone into the U.S. military. No one had done their background. When they did his background in U.S. Customs and Border Protection, nobody did the work because he was already in the United States. He had every access to every sensor of the Texas Department of Public Safety on the border, created by the man sitting right over here today, along with Border Patrols, and had been giving it to the Gulf Cartel all along. But Jaeson, as long as it stays in Mexico, they kept telling me, and I'm screaming as I'm crossing the country, trying to talk to leadership within the Homeland Security enterprise. We've got to look at what's happening differently. When we were in a search warrant at his house, this is what we found. Not only a cartel pistol, but I think it was about $89,000 in cash and some dope. But Jaeson, as long as it stays in Mexico, they tell me. And this young autistic girl had her head removed in Alabama because her grandmother was doing the same thing, stealing a few loads. Jaeson, as long as that stuff stays in Mexico, it's not our problem, it's Mexico's problem. Sinaloa cartel was responsible for this. And I know what you're thinking, how can this be happening? How have we not heard about this? Ladies and gentlemen, I could do this all day long. Don't worry, I won't bother you with that. I'm frustrated beyond belief at this point. And finally, I end up meeting the real deal journalist, Larry Logan, and have the ability to show what is really happening to somebody that wasn't just going to sit in an air-conditioned building. And I want to show you what the first gun battle that went nationwide by a national correspondent can look like to really illuminate a problem. Because for the first time, I thought for myself, my God, finally, somebody cares enough to at least tell the American people what the hell has been happening. And not only that, sit on the side of the river at 3 and 4 a.m. in the morning back to back.
It's 4 a.m. on the southern border in Texas, in the tiny town of Roma. Listen to that.
This is what I'm trying to warn about. Another day at the border.
We'd arrived with counterterrorism specialist Jaeson Jones to find war raging on America's doorstep.
Oh, there you go. There's a 40. Did you hear the 40?
Yes.
That was
40 millimeter grenade.
That was a grenade, yeah.
Yeah.
It's unreal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right here on the border.
Oh, there's the 40. That's the 40 millimeter. Oh, and there's the. Across the Rio Grande in the Mexican city of Miguel Alemán, a resident captured this view. The people here trapped between rival cartels fighting for control. Back on the U.S. side, Jones had been keeping track. So this is 3 nights in a row here?
This is the 4th day of back-to-back gun battles that Border Patrol has heard these things and reported them in for 4 days straight. Yesterday they had a gun battle at noon, same location where we're reporting from here.
Ladies and gentlemen, you can go to your border and be in certain areas at the right time, and you will capture these gun battles that will rage anywhere from 30 minutes to 3+ hours. You leveraging everything from 50 caliber belt-fed machine guns, armored vehicles, 40 millimeter grenades like Lara was talking about, and rounds coming into the United States where our own citizens are having to listen to this multiple times a week. I am breaking these stories back to back. This week on Newsmax, I broke another story of a gun battle that took place in Miguel Alemán. They are happening all the time as Cartel del Noreste, known as CDN, and Cartel de Golfo, known as CDG, which is now becoming CJNG, are battling for control as CDG is losing its power in that region. And you say, well, Jason, at least that's Mexico, as long as it doesn't impact us. Because that's what they're always telling me. This is what's now known as the Hebronville incident. This was another major tripwire. You've seen this from the governor of Texas, and this came from a human source after a phone was recovered, and we got this out nationwide. What I want you to pay attention to is the lights on the dash. I want you to look at the weaponry. I want you to look at the clothing that they're wearing. And what you're seeing is what we believe is Cartel de Golfo moving a group of high values into the United States further. But remember, this is Hebronville, Texas, 80+ miles into the U.S. It's the tradecraft of Mexico that I'm asking you to look at here from what I've shown you earlier.
In half a mile, your destination will be on the right.
Dale todo derecho.
Que no se haya movido este güey, márcale, dile.
Ahí está el...
¿Está en línea?
Sí, está en línea.
¿Cuánto falta? ¿Cuánto falta?
Ya 1 minuto. Sigue derecho.
¿Seguro que derecho?
Simón, ten cuidado. Llegamos
They're
allá.
getting ready to come up to a state highway, and then they're going to do a pass-off of these folks. I want you to look at how fast this happens.
¡Changa!
Your destination is on the right.
Aquí.
¡Changa! Sobre, vatos, ahorita la verga, corto la verga. Sobre, todos a la verga. Todos a la verga.
Córrele, güey, córrele.
Most of these trucks are stolen out of San Antonio, ladies and gentlemen, here. They're taken down, the seats are ripped out. The vehicles are used to make armored vehicles in Mexico. If they're on this side, then they're used for smuggling like this. So this is, what they're doing is staying off the main roadways, going from one ranch to another ranch. We showed this to Border Patrol. They knew the location immediately. That's how we were able to identify it, and they were able to send extra folks out there. But I want you to think of this. Imagine being a single lawman conducting a traffic stop. Your closest backup is 40 miles away, or even more. That's your roadway to your personal ranch. And this is what's coming up and down on our roadways, 80 miles into the United States. But yet they tell me, Jason, as long as it stays in Mexico. June 3rd, 2022, Interstate 10, Phoenix, Arizona. What you're seeing right here is a 50 caliber rifle known as a Barrett. This is an Arizona state trooper, ladies and gentlemen. You're about to see another Arizona state trooper being passed. And I want you to notice the kit, the body armor that the suspect's wearing. I want you to notice the 4 Glock pistols he has, along with on his hand here, or in his hand, it's either an SKS or an AK-47 with a drum round. But as long as it stays in Mexico, Jason, they keep telling me. There was the other trooper they just passed. Notice they do not care. They did not move because they do not fear us. They have no reason to, ladies and gentlemen. We have done nothing to stop what has been taking place. And they will tell you that there is no spillover violence into the United States. Do you know what the term for spillover violence is under the federal government? There isn't one, because you can't get DEA, FBI, Office of National Drug Control Policy to agree to a terminology. I can tell you that for a fact because I worked it for over 2 years trying to create one so that we could build policy in the state of Texas behind it. As long as it stays in Mexico, they told me, Jason. This is June 22. I want you to look at the bodies. Thanks to the Texas Department of Public Safety's elite aircraft division and the leadership, they were willing to share this so we could get it out to the American people. I want you to see how they dumped 2 migrants on the side of Interstate 10. You are literally looking at feet from Interstate 10 near Van Horn, Texas. These migrants that crossed, we believe they died from heat exhaustion. Not exactly sure. But look at how they were just dumped and laid over on top of one another as if they're nothing. Because to them, they are nothing. They are a commodity. And they will tell you that. And Lara can speak to this because she's been with me where we have debriefed some of these people. And they will tell you that killing these folks is like nothing. It's like, I think if I remember correctly, didn't he say, Lara, it's like squashing a bug? Is that the right term? Like a fly. But as long as it stays in Mexico, they would tell me, Jason, and the whole time, I could do an entire presentation on this slide alone. I want you to look at where we are, ladies and gentlemen. This is CDC data going back to the 60s. And there are some major tripwires here that showed us what was coming. Look at where we were in the 80s. Most of us remember the crack epidemic in this nation when we had about 10,000 overdose deaths per year. Major tripwire happened here in 2005. I'm an undercover narcotics agent in Houston, Texas, assigned to the high-intensity drug trafficking area. And we were working meth labs, domestic labs. And what happened then, you may remember, is when at the state and at the federal level, we began outlawing the ability to get pseudoephedrine so that domestic labs can make meth. 1 week, it was like overnight, our meth labs almost shut down completely. And Mexican meth began coming into Texas, just pouring into the state. And the addicts didn't like it at first. They would tell you that it's shit dope is the way they would put it. But Jason, it's free. You see, this is another thing they don't tell you about how the cartels operate. The way they take over a market is they push it onto the streets for almost virtually nothing. And when you already don't have anything, this is a way you can get high on something else. And this is how they take over markets. Same way they did it with fentanyl in this country. So this was a major change. This is the rise of Mexican methamphetamine into this country. Right here, this is 2015, ladies and gentlemen. This is the first year that we began seeing fentanyl manufactured by the Sinaloans. 70 pounds was seized by U.S. Customs and Border Protection on your southwest border. And look at what happened every year after. And yet Republicans and Democrats did nothing differently policy-wise to stop what was taking place. You know, this breaks my heart because when we talk to families and you listen to the pain they're in over losing their children, they're right. These are poisonings. These are not overdose deaths. These are people who go to study in college, young kids who take a pill they think is Xanax. Really, their friend bought it from a drug dealer, and now they're dead. These are poisonings, and yet most of us are not aware to what degree these cartels have played a major role in this transition. And what are we doing right now? If I was to ask you, what programs do we have in place to stop it? Exactly. How can you be in the leadership position of the DEA, FBI, DHS, Office of National Drug Control Policy, and yet you hear virtually almost nothing about what's taking place? Well, the DEA administrator did admit the other day that Snapchat's a huge problem. Not kidding you. This is true. Now, she's not wrong. Dealers at the smallest level are using Snapchat to sell narcotics to young people. That's absolutely true. The problem is, that's not the problem. You've got to go after these labs and you've got to go after these cartels. How could this have taken place? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to close here. This happened for a multitude of reasons. Failed leadership, what I call institutionalized cowardice at the highest levels of our government. And I don't mean elected officials only, ladies and gentlemen. The Homeland Security enterprise whose job it is to fix this problem and protect our citizens. But there's another part of this too, and I know you're going to think, my God, this can't really be a huge issue, but it is. The Uniform Crime Report was created in 1929, was implemented in 1934, and until 2021 was the main mechanism for which we collect crime data in this country. So as I'm traveling saying we got problems, the data didn't validate it. Yet at the southern states, what were we dealing with? Everything I've shown you today, right? Public corruption, kidnapping, extortion, drug trafficking, human smuggling, money laundering, weapons, cyber, etc. None of it captured under the Uniform Crime Report, so that as local, state, and federal law enforcement of 18,000 agencies can share with you where we really are. And so the problem that we are facing is transnational crime. Now they have what is known as NIBRS, the National Incident-Based Reporting System, what they call the new system. It was created in 1984, implemented in 1988, and is a total failure. Is it better? Absolutely. Captures 52 new index crimes, which do capture some of the transnational crime, but it will not fix where we are. I want to close with this, and I want you to listen to this sheriff for a minute. This is an interview I did of Sheriff Shelton, just south of San Antonio, Texas. And I want you to listen to this case, because this is, I think, with a sum of all fears of where we have gone with transnational crime now. I want you to listen to what he has to say, because what we are really seeing now is what I call the convergence, ladies and gentlemen, where crime has come into this country from foreign state and non-state actors to such a degree that now we're seeing a reverse of what's now going south. And it's not just people and drugs moving north.
The thing that sticks in my mind is a stop my chief deputy made. It was two individuals, young man and young woman.
How'd you hear?
And turns out he was transporting her to the border to sell her for $10,000. He was going to traffic her. They had been on the road for 16 hours from up north, and she just got in too deep, didn't know how to get out until my deputy made that stop.
He saved her life.
Absolutely. And had my chief not stopped her 80 miles from the border, she would have disappeared. She's going to graduate from high school this year because of him.
That is one sheriff in one county with 10 deputies. Ladies and gentlemen, we have problems. These problems have solutions. Those solutions involve designating these cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. I want you to know I've been at this for 5.5 years. We are not going to stop until we get it done. I want you to know that this problem is absolutely fixable. The immigration issue, that is a layer. We know exactly what needs to be done to fix the immigration issue in this country. We can fix it. The problem now is the national security issues that we are facing at unprecedented levels. And I can tell you this, as of 2 years ago, where we were and where we are now are night and day differences. We will have to make massive changes. We will have to be extremely aggressive. And for those families who have lost everything, they deserve justice, both in Mexico, in our country, and so many migrants who have crossed through these nations trying to get here. Thank you all for having me, and know that we're going to get this done. Thank you.